When it comes to Caiera, she is Scar's mother, and I do recommend this card. She's a very flexible card that fits into a lot of the roles armor would fit and just makes good decks better. There's going to be a lot of different decks that will be utilizing this card moving forward and kind of reminds me of Jeff in terms of what people will be talking about or thinking about getting this card in the future. So, has my full check mark here. How you doing? So, hello everybody. We will be talking about Caiera, the old strong, newest card coming out in Marvel Snap. It's next to Scar, coming out at roughly the same time, but this is the one in the spotlight. We'll be talking about how good she is and just some deck ideas, deck builds for you guys to try out. So, should be a fun one. Let's begin. Alright, we're gonna be talking about Caiera, the old strong. So she is a 3/4 ongoing with your 1 and 6 cost cards can't be destroyed. So that's pretty armor esque essentially. That's really the most synergistic or similar card to this card. And essentially armor right protects one lane. This kind of protects the whole field. And it will also protect your 1 and 6. Armor could protect any cost type, but this one is restricted to 1 drops and 6 drops. Now I will say that 1 drops and 6 drops are the most common card to be killed, right? 1 drops with Killmonger, 6 drops with Shang-Chi, and etc. So this pretty much covers the biggest range of types that would really be threatened by destroy in most games. So it's a pretty safe ability in just removing some of the biggest problems to some deck archetypes. There's definitely some archetypes that want to get 6 drops out early or multiple 6 drops out, and you can't really play like multiple 6 drops in one turn usually. So you usually have to play a 6 drop earlier, and then that opens up a window for Shang-Chi to kind of ruin your day, especially since you'll have priority if you're doing that. And usually, right, if incorrect or playing into like, some of those, like the Nexus or something, you might just get multiple cards destroyed. And in terms of 1 drops, there's just very annoying 1 drops that really threaten people's locations, right? Nebula is one of the big ones, Sunspot's another, right? And if you're playing Evolutionary Hulk, right? She-Hulk and things like that. Quinjet is another one that's really popular. So just being able to protect those from being destroyed is also just very safe. So overall, it's just a safe card in decks that need it, and it's just a pretty flexible card in that there's a lot of decks that play 6 drops. There's a lot of decks that play 1 drops. And one thing I like about this in terms of the 1 drop placement is a lot of times when you're playing armor as your protection, you have to put your 1 drops in the same lane because that's how you're going to protect those 1 drops from being destroyed by Killmonger here. And that kind of restricts how much power you can put in there, how much like different cards that really fit in that particular lane, because you have to put like 2 1 drops and an armor. So that leaves you like one slot open. So with this one, you can put your Nebula in one lane, your Sunspot in another, and really contest multiple lanes with like these 1 drop cards that are a little bit annoying. So there's a lot going for this card in a sense. And when it comes to whether I think you should get this card or not, my overall impression is that this is a card I do recommend. So the reason why, it's just a more flexible armor in essence currently as it is. It's not a fancy card. It's not a card that will be the difference between you winning or losing. Well, I mean, it can be, but it's not. It in it itself is not the winning card for you, but it's a nice tech card that fits into decks that are already good. One of the main criteria I use in terms of whether like recommend a card or I think a card is going to be good is, does it already work in good decks? Do you have to build a new deck around this card, or can I just slot this card into an old deck and that deck just gets better because I'm playing this card instead of a different card? And I would say if Caiera fits the, I slot this into lots of old decks and the deck just gets better because now I have this super safe way of making sure that my 6 drops and my 1 drops are just protected. So that's a big plus for it. It fits in a lot of different deck archetypes. Another thing I look for is, can you play this in multiple deck archetypes and it not be awkward or not have to require like this combo that is just like harder to execute? This one you just plug and play like an armor, fits in, and you don't really need to think too hard. You can find some of your older decks, right, that have armor in it, switch out the armor for Caiera, you're doing well. Or you can play both, essentially, right? If you want to be super consistent with the destroy, if being destroyed is like your main loss condition, then you could just run both and have that huge chance of drawing one of the two in the right order so that it's generally fine to play. So it's a card that doesn't need to be built around. It fits in lots of different decks. It makes good decks. Decks are already good better. It's an armor roll with more flexibility, and then it has Jeff-esque usability. So Jeff is a card that came out, right? People weren't super like sure whether it was going to be good or not. I kind of, regardless of what I said, right? But it is a card that stands in itself as a usable card that consistently becomes included into new decks or old decks. If a deck is created, a lot of times Jeff can just sit in there and not be a problem. Same thing here. If a deck is created that's requiring 6 drops, that's requiring 1 drops, you could just put Caiera in there and it's not really a problem. It's not really something you have to think too much about. And that's really something that's really powerful in a card because it just means like this card will get better as more cards are created because you'll have more opportunities or more deck archetypes that can really use the 1 or 6 drop protection. So it's just a card that seems very good, fits already. Decks are performing with this card already, so there's not really any like, oh my god, the stats are bad, the stats are good. So there's just really not any issues with this card that I can really see. Except it's like not flashy, or you don't want to spend the spotlights because you don't like the art, the other 2 cards next to it. But the 2 cards are good, or you already have the 2 cards, is most likely more likely. So generally as a card itself, it's good. I do recommend it if you're like wondering whether you should pick it up and you need a reason. Here you go. So just a good card. Now let's talk about the spotlights and all that extra fancy stuff that we always talk about here. So when it comes to spotlights, right, I made my spotlight tier guide like yesterday or so, but I have this in the S tier mostly because all the cards are good. Like there's no issue here. Like let's say you're a new player, right? You take these 3, you can probably build a high evolutionary deck that does really well, right? Like you don't really need much else. If you just take these, you have Nebula, right? Misty Knight comes in. Sunspot I think comes in as well, right? Then you have Hulk already. Then you add the Caiera. Like you're kind of good to make a functioning Hulk deck. You've got so maybe She-Hulk, but you don't have to play She-Hulk in Hulk, so it's not really necessary, but it's definitely something you can do. So it's just like this is like a very, very good spotlight to pick up. Like generally, all the cards are playable. All the cards I think are good. So I don't really have any issues with the spotlights. And it's the best spotlight thing in the week. So generally, the one issue is like, yeah, you have High Evolution, you have Nebula already. Do you want just Caiera? I would say it's acceptable. It's an acceptable thing to do, right? Essentially, instead of spending 6,000 tokens, which you might have to do later down the line, you can just spend your 4 or your 1 to 4 spotlight keys and see if you get the hits. So generally seems okay to me, right? Some people might not want the variants or whatever, but that's not matters here. Now let's talk about some of the decks builds that you can do here. So first off, right, just this is kind of what I'm talking about. The Caiera and Nebula, you just slot that in, you can make a deck. I will say this one does have She-Hulk, right? But you could make one without She-Hulk. Like that's generally fine. But essentially, like you don't really need too much to make a functioning deck with those spotlights. And generally, a lot of times Caiera is just slotting in for armor, and you're kind of good to go. So where armor would be before, you can just put Caiera in, and now you have more wider protection. Now I will say armor is 2 mana, where Caiera is 3 mana, and in some decks that might matter. In this deck, right, mana is important, right? Mana lets you buff up your Hulk. It lets you get your She-Hulk cheaper. It might get your Cyclops proc, your Sunspot proc, your Misty Knight proc, right? So there's this isn't like all upside, right? If you care about mana, there might be a window where you might want a cheaper option, or especially if you're running multiple, lots of threes that you need to play. That might also be important. But generally, in a lot of decks, it's generally going to be fine. This one works for sure. I would say the most popular kind of Caiera list right now is a Thanos variant, just because blob is really cool. People love blobbing all over people, so you can just do that here. A lot of little 6-drop. Scar gets to come out very cheaply as well. And you also play the Shang-Chi in case other people are doing the same thing but don't have the Caiera yet. So it seems very flexible, seems very good. So a lot of people are kind of doing that. So if you like Thanos, you're probably already playing a list like this, but Caiera just fits in decently well. Next up, we have some other lists you can do with Caiera. Shuri is one that does work, especially with Scar, right? Scar coming in and giving people more options to play lots of heavy cards. You can play Miss Marvel in every list these days, so fits in this one here. But it's just like a nice secondary, since a lot of the Shuri losses tend to be getting destroyed by Shang-Chi. You're running both armor and Caiera, since it'll just double dip on the protection. Also means you can armor the Red Skull and then have Caiera protect the other cards. So generally seems like a pretty safe investment if that's what you want to do. Next up, we have a Hela deck, right? So this is a Lockjaw Black Knight Hela. Black Knight's a card I really want to fully test out. I still think it has a lot of potential. Hela is just a classic list in here, and you have a couple of discards, right? The Blade and the Lady Civ to kind of get something good. You're not really fully necessarily reliant on the Hela. There's only 2 discards, so you can maybe shuffle the Blade back in and pull it again. But there is still just getting good value with a Black Knight into a Death, Black Knight into a Infinite, and then just playing the 412 or the 420 on the ground and then seeing where that ends up. So just a lot of good power here that fits into the playstyle, and it's something you could definitely try if you like this type of deck. And next up, we do have just a ramp list, right? Ramp is nice for Caiera since you get to play multiple 6-drops, and you don't have to worry too much about them being destroyed. So that kind of just fits into the archetype that you want. So you can just go Caiera into Wave or Wave into Caiera, blah, 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 blah. You can Electro Ramp, whatever you want, and just get these big power cards and not worry about them being Shang-Chi'd. So just a nice, simple deck if you like playing big things and not thinking about it too much. I think the blob into Taskmaster is interesting. I haven't really seen that many people do that, mostly because I leave, but it's definitely an interesting, viable strategy. Next up, we have and I think last we have just a more singular Black Knight deck. So this is definitely more focused on the Black Knight aspect than like the ramp, the Hela, all that things. And you get to play your Black Knight, you get to play your Lady Sin, Ghost Rider, and just you get Miss Marvel in there just because it's a good card. So just a lot of like little synergies that kind of work together, a decent amount of force. So if you like Black Knight, this is something that I can do. But overall, Caiera seems like a strong card that's just gonna be part of the meta game moving forward. So you can pick it up now, or you can wait, maybe spend some time, see if you really want to make a deck that utilizes it, and then maybe get it for tokens if you want to wait down the line. But I could definitely see later on in the future people like, I should have got Caiera earlier or something like that. I don't know. Just kind of like how Jeff is today. So take care of yourselves. Hope you guys enjoy it and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be